Well, wow. This is season 2, episode 8, Under the Cloak of War, I believe it's called. Let's just double check. Under the Cloak of War. This is a big episode. There's going to be spoilers. I'm not going to recap the story so much, but we're going to talk about it. So stick around, like, comment, and subscribe. So this is our first look at the Klingon and Federation war that was seen in first season of Discovery. We even get a clip of the first season of Discovery and the way the Klingons used to look, which was probably a bit confusing for people not watching it. But we got a really deep, dark look at sort of a huge battle, the Battle of Jagar, during the Klingon War, Mbenga and Chapel serving. We've got a hint at this in the first episode of the season, and we get this sort of emotional drive. Mbenga's just treating people and treating people and treating people. We find out that he was a master fighter, but he chose to be a doctor and a healer, and he amazingly is just so intense. I can't stress enough, this is a great episode. The Enterprise has a Klingon ambassador who comes aboard, who is essentially the one who ordered the Klingons to kill everyone. Women, children, civilians, army, didn't matter. He ordered them to kill them. And Ortega's obviously doesn't want to be around him. Chapel doesn't want to be around him. And Mbenga doesn't want to be around him. And we sort of see that tension growing. Mbenga has panic attacks, anxiety attacks. He's deeply affected by this. Chapel is, but she's a bit more reserved, but she's not handling it well. And Ortega runs her mouth because she just can't keep it in. Pike is playing sort of a peacekeeper in it. He wants the diplomacy of it. He wants to understand it. So what we get throughout this episode is flashbacks to that battle on Jagar. And we see that Mbenga and Chapel are just saving people and helping people and helping people. Mbenga eventually, he saves one of the soldiers and talks to him about war and why they're fighting it. They're fighting it so the people they love can have a good life. And the soldier's talking about his fears and how he's afraid. And Mbenga's sort of talking about how we make choices that we don't want to let war change us. The Federation is this. And it was just an amazing, amazing story. Later in the story, that same soldier who had been showing his fears decides to go and fight back. And we find out that he's passed away. I don't know how to describe it. The traumatizing, this is the biggest, I would say the biggest scale looking war we've seen since Deep Space Nine. Obviously, Discovery had Klingon elements of the war, but they never really showed us like ground fighting war. It was a really, really great visualization of how brutal the Klingons are. It was a great illustration of the trauma that some of the crew had gone through. It was brilliant. So we gradually throughout this episode see tension building with Chapel and Mbenga. And then we see Mbenga is essentially resisting going overboard. Him and the ambassador have a sparring session and they talk about it. And he talks about how he wants Mbenga to join him because they both represent the Federation and the Klingons, and coming together would be brilliant. And Mbenga doesn't want to. He doesn't want anything to do with this guy. He's literally doing his best not to smack him in the face. But he comes close to it. And then Una talks to Pike and just says, look, the tension on the ship's really bad. We need to get rid of him. They shorten it down. Then the Klingon ambassador goes to see Mbenga to talk to him again about this. And we see Mbenga's got a case. And we find out that Mbenga is the one who killed the Klingon soldiers, because this ambassador had apparently killed these soldiers and rebelled against and defected from the Klingons. But we find out that it was actually, he was cowardly and Mbenga had killed these 3 soldiers. Mbenga was in fact the butcher of Jagar, the bad guy. And so we find the Klingon ambassador he wants to be forgiven for what he did and he wants to do good, but it's all built on a lie. Whether you sit on either side or not, whether it was founded or not, that's up to him. Pike is obviously coming from a Federation point of view. He wasn't involved in the Klingon War, and he's sort of trying to handle it as a diplomat when he's got crew members filled to the brim with emotion and just raw anger. Mbenga and the general or the ambassador are in the medical room. They start talking. The ambassador reaches and tells Mbenga that they're the same, and he touches him on the shoulder. They have a brief scuffle, and Mbenga pulls a Klingon blade from his container and stabs the ambassador in the stomach, I'm assuming, or just to kill him. Chapel sees it at the tail end, and they all stand up for Mbenga and say that the ambassador was attacking him, which was partially the case. It wasn't the full case. Obviously, in self-defense, Mbenga didn't get in trouble. But then there's this really great scene at the end where Pike and Mbenga have a talk. And Mbenga talks about what he did and how he feels and the fact that he is not sorry that he died. It doesn't matter. Pike talks about diplomacy and how the Federation is meant to represent peace and togetherness. And it's a really interesting juxtaposition. Very reminiscent of some Deep Space Nine episodes. It was fantastic. This season of Strange New Worlds started off a bit dull. That first episode a bit dull. But it has progressively blown me away with each episode getting better and better and better. Hopefully they nail it with that musical episode next week. Hopefully. But yeah, they really nailed the emotion. The writer of this, like I'm honestly, I will look up the writer now because whoever wrote this fucking deserves money or deserves something. This is written by Davey Perez, and I'm going to say he needs to come back next season because this was fantastic. This was a really fantastically written episode. We got Clint Howard popping up, who was in the original series, and I think he's popped up a couple of times in different Star Treks, and I love the way he keeps popping back up. Been in the show for nearly 60 years now, hasn't he? Really, really fun. It was a fantastic episode. I want to know what you think. Write it in the comments, especially if you've been involved in a war or you've been in a war. I'd love to hear about it. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, share this video around, and I'll see you next week for the musical episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds.